With a wave of change in public opinion polls and a snap election lasting only 36 days, every moment of this campaign counts, forcing parties of all stripes to jolt into action. I spoke to a Liberal strategist and a former Conservative staffer to find out how each party is equipped to tackle the ground game right here in Calgary.
I think, it's even though a party is responsible for calling the election, it's always still a bit of chaos in getting things set up because you got to mobilize so many volunteers, open offices, figure out candidates. And I think one of the things in terms of candidate selection is we were a little bit behind on that. So you saw that really go into the writ period, which did delay the launch of some campaigns. But once those candidates were in place, I think for a lot of the infrastructure in Alberta, you've seen it come up pretty quickly and right away and be fairly solid. And I think that's due to the volunteer base here, the core of Liberals who work hard at kind of being trained and going to, the volunteer trainings on a year-round basis, whether it's an election or not.
The Conservatives had, I think, a significant incumbency advantage in Calgary, just given that so many of them are incumbent MPs. And if they weren't, for the most part, they had ran previous by-elections or had already appointed candidates a couple of weeks ago, with only a few exceptions.
This election has been rough for candidate vetting. Across the country for Liberals and Conservatives, more than a half dozen candidates have either stepped away or been stripped of their candidacy, including here in Calgary Confederation, a riding pegged by pollsters as being in play, where Liberal candidate Thomas Keeper was ousted for failing to disclose a domestic assault charge that was stayed in 2005.
A lot of that has to do with the vetting process and the level of depth you could get into a vetting process based on the timeline of selecting candidates. And what I think is important to recognize is that the Liberals did continue vetting their candidates even after they put them in place. And when information became revealed that, those candidates were perhaps not fit for office, that action was taken to remove them from that role. So I think that that's like what I would say is probably the more important piece, is that they're still focused on putting the right people or the best people forward.
How riding ready a party is, how it vets its candidates, does all that matter to voters?
When you vote based on party or leader. The average candidate probably makes 3 to 5% difference. But in a tight race, that 3 to 5% makes a huge difference. And then obviously there are real big superstar candidates whose popularity supersedes the party or the leader, and they're able to win even in tough elections times. But those are very rare. And there's been a lot of research on this, and they've shown that the local candidate makes between a 3 and 5% difference. Likewise, having those volunteers and getting people to the polls, getting them to the advanced stations, doing the tracking, because they're not just door knocking and talking to constituents, they are tracking likely voters. They are tracking who are you likely to vote for, and most parties have a 4-point scale on how they measure that. And so in a lopsided win, none of that matters. In a tight race, that really does matter.
Dwayne Bratt says Conservatives have the Alberta advantage, but there's more to it.
There's a lot of overlap between volunteers from both the provincial party and the federal party. The Liberals have a very different situation where, because of their lack of support in Calgary for decades, they have a very small cohort of volunteers to go forward. They can't rely on their provincial wing because the provincial wing is even worse than the federal wing. But in some of those battlegrounds, they've already gone through that, right? So Calgary Centre has had some tough races, so both teams are prepared. Confederation had a tough battle in 2015, so they've still got some muscle memory there. And out in the Northeast, George Chahal has won. He's got his team there. The Conservatives have targeted him for a while. In those battlegrounds, I think the parties are prepared, but I would have to give the Conservatives an edge there, just because they've been better prepared for a longer period of time than the Liberals.
The Liberal strategy, Grover tells me, is about prioritizing resources where they matter.
Every riding in the city has a candidate, but not every riding in the city has an equal chance of being able to be won. And so I think that that's how how people will prioritize which campaign they come out to.
3 months ago, the Liberals were headed for annihilation. There wasn't a single seat in the city that they were going to be competitive in, and that included George Chahal and Calgary Skyview. Under new leadership, Mark Carney has breathed some new life and competitiveness, not just into the incumbent held ridings, but a handful of others around the city as well. So I think it has changed the tact in the gameplay a little bit here for the Conservatives, who, broadly speaking, had no business losing any seat in the city.
Nominations for candidates closed April 7th, with some Alberta ridings cutting it pretty close to that deadline, selecting who would run and where. But those names are locked in now, with a few weeks to go before Canadians head to the polls. Helen Pike, CBC News, Calgary.